ما شاء الله. ايش الهجوم هذا؟ ما شاء الله، بركات بركات، ما شاء الله. عليكم السلام ورحمة الله. طيب طيب، you ready؟ بسم الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم ربنا لك الحمد والشكر كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك منك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار. أما بعد، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Inshallah, everybody is well, and may Allah Azza wa Jal allow us to utilize those 10 days of Dhul Hijjah in the best possible way, inshallah tabarak ta'ala. If you were here for Jum'ah, for the khutbah, you would have heard that we are now in the best 10 days of the year. If the last 10 nights of Ramadan are the best 10 nights of the year, the first 10 days of the month of Dhul Hijjah, this month, are the best 10 days of the year. And we need to try to utilize those days and make as much ibadah as possible, inshallah tabarak ta'ala, to get the maximum benefit, inshallah. And one of the reasons these days are the best days is because of Hajj, of course, and the wuquf in Arafah, the standing in Arafah. And Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says in the meaning of the hadith, خير يوم طلعت عليه الشمس يوم عرفة. The best day upon which the sun has risen is the day of Arafah. May Allah tabarak ta'ala accept from the Hujjaj their Hajj, and may Allah tabarak ta'ala give us the tawfiq to do Hajj again, if you haven't done, to make you do Hajj like for the first time and again, inshaAllah. And may Allah tabarak ta'ala accept from one and all. Last week we started talking about the hijrah to Habasha, and we said when the situation became excessively difficult for the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam could no longer offer them protection, he asked them to migrate. And he asked them to migrate and leave their beloved city of Mecca, which, as you know, is the holiest of places for Muslims, the most sacred of all places. The Kaaba is there, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is there. They love Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam more than anything and anybody else, but he asked them to do the hijrah. There were about 83 men and 18 women who made that hijrah to Habasha, and this is the second hijrah to Habasha. The first one, as you saw, they went for a very short period of time, and they thought that was the 5th year of Nubuwwah, the 5th year of the beginning of Nubuwwah, and then they came back, and now he's asking them to go again. And the reasoning, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, go to Habasha because you will find a king who is just, a king who will not commit dhulm, oppression. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says in a hadith that is sahih, that Allah tabarak wa ta'ala says, إِنِّي حَرَّمْتُ الظُّلْمَ عَلَى نَفْسِي وَقَدْ حَرَّمْتُهُ بَيْنَكُمْ. I have made dhulm, Allah said, I have made dhulm. Dhulm and the word dhalam in Arabic come from the same root word. Dhalam means darknesses. And dhulm is the oppression and tyranny and injustices that on the day of Qiyamah will be darknesses on the oppressor. الظلم ظلمات يوم القيامة. Allah Ta'ala says, dhulm is darknesses on the day of judgment. And Allah says, I have made it haram, prohibited among yourselves, or prohibited on me. Meaning Allah غير ظلام للعبيد. He is not oppressor. And you should not oppress, you should not be unjust. And because the quality of justice is so valuable in the eyes of Islam, Rasulullah ﷺ recognized it in Najashi, in Habasha, and he said to them, go to Habasha, because there is a king there, though a Christian, but he is just. And we said that's quite interesting for two reasons. One is Rasulullah ﷺ's awareness of what was going around him. He didn't live in isolation. He was aware of what was going outside of Mecca. He knew there was a king that is just. That's number one. Secondly, Rasulullah ﷺ, he recognized this essential, universal, good quality in this king who was a Christian. And as if he is saying to us, you should do the same. Qualities are not necessarily the domain of a Muslim. Sometimes you find a person who's not a Muslim, he or she may have some better qualities than some Muslims, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. The fact that a Muslim sometimes doesn't have certain qualities, meaning he or she needs to work on those qualities. But you might find some Muslims who truly have beautiful qualities that we may lack. But we should learn from those, and that's why Rasulullah says, إِنَّمَا بُعِثْتُ لِأُتَمِّمَ مَكَارِمَ الْأَخْلَاقِ. I have been sent to perfect good morals or moral character. In other words, moral character or akhlaq exists, and you may find it in other people, but I have been sent to perfect it. That is, if you bring deen in your life, you will bring those qualities in your life, those moral values in your life. So he asked them to go. Now in asking them to go, he was, Rasulullah ﷺ, also teaching us and teaching his ummah something else. Al-akhdhu bil-asbab, la yunaqid at-tawakkul ala Allah. To take means, to utilize all the possible halal means within your control is not only acceptable in Islam, but it does not go against the concept of tawakkul on Allah. Tawakkul means reliance on Allah, to rely on Allah. Reliance on Allah does not mean do not use the means that Allah Ta'ala has given you, that Allah Ta'ala has placed at your disposal. Al-asbab. Because Allah Ta'ala created this world as a world of cause and effect. It's a world of asbab. And the ulama say, the scholars they say, had Allah Ta'ala willed, He could have created a world without asbab. Allah qadir. Allah can do what He wants. But it is His hikmah, Allah's wisdom, is that He created a world with asbab, with means. So for example, a person says, I want to go to the masjid and drive my car because I'm going to do a good deed and I'm going to the house of Allah Ta'ala. Allah will look after me. The logic is sound. And therefore, when I jump in my car and I drive, I will do so blindfolded. Tawakkal ala Allah, rely on Allah Ta'ala. Allah will look after me. Now to this person, we would say, you have misunderstood the meaning of tawakkul. Tawakkul, as the ulama defined it, amal wa amal. Amal wa amal. You do what you can and hope in Allah Ta'ala. So a mu'min, Rasulullah is teaching, you have to take the asbab, the halal asbab, but you never trust in the asbab. You take the means, but you trust in the Lord of the means, Allah Ta'ala. Because Allah Ta'ala can change. He says, you do your best. Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahmatullah alayhi was traveling for a Hajj journey, and everybody's ready. They've got their camels, they've got their food, they've got their water. It's a long, they used to take a long time. And there was a man with them who came with no camel, with no donkey or horse or food or water. And so Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal said to him, where are you going? He says, I'm going for Hajj. He says, and you're not taking anything with you? He says, no, I have tawakkul. I rely on Allah. So Imam Ahmad Imam Ahmad is Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal rahmatullah alayhi. He said to him, in that case, don't use our camels and don't eat our food. Let Allah feed you. He can. The man will never reach his destination. The ulama say, Allah Ta'ala gave us asbab and asked us to use it, and in doing so, we are essentially saying we trust in Allah's wisdom, Allah's hikmah, wal hakim. We trust in His wisdom. He said, take all the necessary means, and it's a world of cause and effect. So He sent them to Habasha. And as exactly Rasulullah ﷺ mentioned, they found Najashi to be a very just person. And he received them with open arms, and they said, we were treated well. We were allowed to live in Habasha freely, and we were allowed to perform our acts of worship, and we weren't restricted in practicing our deen, which is very important, because the ulama say it is acceptable to migrate from one place to another if it means to protect your deen and your iman and your faith, provided you are not going to be asked to compromise it. And so in Habasha, they weren't asked to compromise. Of course, the people of Quraysh weren't very happy with that. The Quraysh got together and they said, we will not allow this to happen. And there was a trade relationship between Mecca and Habasha. And the chiefs of Quraysh knew some contacts in Habasha. So they wanted to do some lobbying. That's what it was. They wanted to lobby the king, Najashi, and persuade him to return those Muslims back to Mecca. So they sent two of their outspoken Qurayshis, and they decided, they made a plan among themselves. They said, we will take as many gifts as we can. And the Abyssinians at the time, they loved tanned leather. So they took a lot of leather with them. And they said to themselves, when we get to Habasha, the first thing we will do is go to the bishops and load them with gifts, and then lobby the bishops and say to them, when we are presented in front of the king, you must side with us and agree that those are rebels. They have gone against the faith of their forefathers. They have gone against the social order of the day. They are what you may call today, in today's language, they would have called them terrorists. That's what they would have called them. The collateral language. There is a book called Collateral Language. If you were ever interested, you can go and read. And it shows how the West is excellent at manufacturing these labels and placing them on people who don't subscribe to their own version of the world and worldview. And exactly, this is, I don't see any difference. The Qurayshis did exactly that. That was their propaganda. They said, go to, and it's lobbying. This is what it is. This is, they say, one of the biggest failures of democracy today is the fact that it relies on so much lobbying. It's influenced by lobby groups. The USA, much worse than Australia, of course. But it's lobby groups. A few years ago, when I was at Griffith University, I had a colleague, professor, I won't mention his name now, one because he passed away, but also just to protect his privacy, I guess. And he and I were supervising a PhD student who was doing his PhD on leadership in Australian Islamic organizations. And we were having coffee. He wasn't a Muslim professor, he was a professor of leadership, one of a world-renowned professor, and organizational leadership. And we were having coffee and we got talking about democracy. And so he said to us, there is no democracy. It's all about power. And then he looks at me and he says, Muhammad, you can't say that, I can. He said, you cannot say that in public. And he's right. And this is what the Quraysh did. So they sent some envoys, some representatives. And that's exactly what they did. They gifted the bishops. They lobbied the bishops to stand with them when they come in the court of the king. But that's why Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, he is a man with justice. And if a person truly has justice and is just, he will not allow any form of lobbying to dissuade him from that which is haqq. So, the Qurayshis arrived, and now they convinced the bishops, and they went to Najashi and they said to the Najashi that these people, that's in the إِنَّهُ صَبَأَ إِلَى بَلَدِ الْمَلِكِ مِنَّا غُلْمَانْ سُفَهَا. First they call them Sufaha. They said to the king, from our country, some stupid people, some ignorant people left Mecca and came to your country. فَارَقُوا دِينَ قَوْمِهِمْ. They left the deen, they left the faith of their people. Not only this, وَلَمْ يَدْخُلُوا فِي دِينِكُمْ. And they haven't accepted Christianity. So they don't follow us, and they're not following you. They don't subscribe to our values. You know, their values are not the same. وَجَاءُوا بِدِينٍ مُبْتَدَعٍ لَا نَعْرِفُهُ نَحْنُ وَلَا أَنْتُمْ. And they look at the lies. Then they said to the king, they also invented a new faith. Neither you know it, nor we know it. In the West today, if you want to draw comparisons, always they talk about Judeo-Christian tradition. They don't ever recognize Islam. Despite the fact, believe it or not, that Islam has had more influence on the making of the Western world than otherwise. Even in their common law, much of the common law, or a good amount of the common law, is derived from the Sharia. But they're not willing to recognize that. They say, this new faith, they're neither following your faith nor our faith. It's a new invented faith. That's what they say. وَقَدْ بَعَثَنَا إِلَى الْمَلِكِ فِيهِمْ أَشْرَافُ قَوْمِهِمْ مِنْ أَبَائِهِمْ وَأَعْمَامِهِمْ. And we have sent to you, O king, the most noble of our people, to speak to you so that you can send them back to us, because they are rebels, they are disobedient, they went against the social order. And as they were making their case, essentially lobbying, the bishops spoke up also, who have been also purchased. And they said, yes, O king, they are speaking the truth, send them back. And then Najashi listened to all of that. فَغَضِبَ النَّجَاشِي. He became extremely angry. ثُمَّ قَالَ لَا هَيْمُ اللَّهِ لَا وَاللَّهِ. He said, I swear by God, I will never submit them to any of you before I hear myself with my own ears their own arguments and what they have to say. قَوْمًا جَارُونِي وَنَزَلُوا بِلَادِي. People who took shelter in my own country. They sought asylum. You want me to put them in detention? I'm sorry, in detention, so I mean, you want me to submit them to you? That's what it is, the asylum. Now Australia, we chuck them all in the asylum detention centers. You want me to give them up like this because of some rumors, because of some propaganda that has been postulated against them? You want me to give them up? He says, Wallahi, I will not do that. حتى أدعوهم, until I invite them. فأسألهم ما يقول هذان, and I will ask them directly. And if they are correct in what they say, meaning those Muslims, Wallahi, they will stay with me, and I would look after them, and I will provide them safety and security, and nobody will be able to take them away from me. But if what you say, the Qurayshis, is true about them, then you can take them. That's fair, that's justice. Let's listen to the arguments. ثم أرسل النجاشي إلى أصحاب رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. He then, Najashi, asked the Sahaba now to come. فدعاهم فلما جاءهم رسوله اجتمعوا. Now can you imagine the scene? Najashi is sitting in his court, the bishops are all around, the Quraysh representative is there, and the Sahaba come in, and they asked Ja'far radiyallahu anhu bin Abi Talib, who was an astute spokesperson. He was an eloquent, erudite spokesperson, which is quite interesting also for our own context. When we want to put somebody forward to speak about, to represent our deen, we must choose those who are able to speak about our faith eloquently, with beauty, without compromising the faith, and in ways that are, if not convincing, rational. And not just anyone. And one of our biggest tragedies as Australian Muslims over the last 20 years was that many a person would just go into the media and start speaking. And this is also sometimes the tricks of the media. They'll go and catch literally anybody in the streets, any Muslim in the street, and try to ask him about Islam. But look at the Sahaba. Although any of those Sahaba would have been able to speak about Islam, but they chose the best among them, the one who's able to represent the message. And this was Ja'far bin Abi Talib radiyallahu anhu. فَقَالَ لَهُ أَيُّهَا الْمَلِكِ Najashi asked him, tell me, what is this? What is going on? Why did you come to me? And those Qurayshis are saying this about you. And he went on to say some of the most amazing summary of Islam. In some narration, or in this narration, he says, and I want to read it and translate it to you. He says, كُنَّا قَوْمًا أَهْلَ الْجَاهِلِيَّةِ. This is how he started. He says, we were a people of ignorance. نَعْبُدُ الْأَصْنَامِ. We used to worship the idols. وَنَأْكُلُ الْمَيْتَةِ. And we ate the carrion, dead meat. وَنَأْتِي الْفَوَاحِشِ. And we used to commit the fawahish, major sins. وَنَقْطَعِ الْأَرْحَامِ. And we severed kinship relations. وَنُسِيءُ الْجَارِ. And we used to be bad to our neighbors. وَيَأْكُلُ الْقَوِيِّ مِنَّا الضَّعِيفِ. And the strong used to take the right of the weak. فَكُنَّا عَلَى ذَلِكَ. That's how we were. حتى بعث الله إلينا رسولا نعرف نسبه وصدقه وأمانته وعفافه. Until Allah had sent us a messenger. We know him, and we know his parents, and we know his grandparents, and we know his lineage, we know his truthfulness, we know his chastity, and we know his purity. فَدَعَانَا إِلَى اللَّهِ لِنُوَحِّدَهُ وَنَعْبُدَهُ. He invited us to worship Allah alone and to believe in Allah alone. وَنَخْلَعْ مَا كُنَّا نَعْبُدْ نَحْنُ وَآبَاؤُنَا. And he asked us to abandon and leave what our forefathers used to believe in statues and the worship of idols. Not only this, وَأَمَرَنَا بِصِدْقِ الْحَدِيثِ. And he ordered us to be truthful when we speak. وَأَدَاءَ الْأَمَانَةِ. And to fulfill the trust when we are entrusted. وَصِلَةَ الرَّحْمِ. And to connect relation ties. وَحُسْنِ الْجَوَارِ. And to be good to our neighbors. وَالْكَفِّ عَنِ الْمَحَارِمِ وَالدِّمَاءِ. And not to shed the blood of innocent people, and not to indulge in defamation. وَنَهَانَ عَنِ الْفَوَاحِشِ. And he asked us not to fall in major sins. وَقَوْلِ الزُّورِ. And false speech. وَأَكْلِ مَالِ الْيَتِيمِ. And he prohibited us from consuming the wealth of the orphan. وَقَذْفِ الْمُحْصَنَاتِ. And he prohibited us from defaming chaste Muslim women. وَأَمَرَنَا أَن نَعْبُدَ اللَّهَ وَحْدَهُ. And he ordered us to worship Allah alone. لَا نُشْرِكْ بِهِ شَيْئًا. Not to associate any partners with Allah. وَأَمَرَنَا بِالصَّلَاةِ وَالزَّكَاةِ وَالصِّيَامِ. And he also ordered us to perform salah and give zakah and to fast Ramadan. This is the beginning of Islam. And this is how much he knew. I mean, this is the whole deen. This is the first 7 years. They still have another so many years to go. In 7 years, look how impressive. قال فعدد عليه أمور الإسلام فصدقناه وآمنا به. Then they said to the Najashi, and he taught us all of these things, so we believed in him. We believed, we knew he was telling us the truth. فعبدنا الله وحده. Therefore we only worship one Allah, and we don't associate partners with Allah, and we make haram what he told us to be haram, and we take as halal what he told us is halal, to the end. فقال له النجاشي هل معك ما جاء به عن الله من شيء. Najashi is listening, full attention. He says, do you have anything of this revelation that has come upon him? Can you read me anything? قال جعفر نعم. He said, yes. Najashi said, read. Remember I said to you, Surah Maryam was already completely revealed. Why Surah Maryam? Because in Surah Maryam, Allah Ta'ala clarifies the aqidah of Muslims about Isa alayhi salam and his mother Mary, and about the question of the Trinity. He clarifies it in Surah Maryam. Not only this, Surah Maryam speaks about Maryam in the most elegant and the most beautiful of ways. You cannot fault it. And he started reading for him the first few verses of Surah Maryam, the narration of Zakaria alayhi salam. Starts about Zakaria, when Allah Ta'ala says to Zakaria, we are going to give you a child. And Zakaria was a very old man at the time, and of course the Ahlul Kitab, the Christians, believe in Zakaria. And Allah Ta'ala, Zakaria says, how can I have a child when I am so old and my wife is barren? And Allah Ta'ala says, it is easy for me. And Allah gave him a child. Allah Ta'ala gave him the news of Yahya. And straight after that, the scene changes from this scene to Maryam in the mihrab. And Allah Ta'ala, every time Zakaria comes to see her, he finds food that is not in season. And he doesn't say anything until after a while, Zakaria, he said, he couldn't keep it anymore. So he said, Anna laki hada, where does all this come from, O Maryam? And Allah Ta'ala just had shown him that he can give him a child even if he was old and his wife is barren, which is much more difficult than bringing food to Maryam. And she answered automatically, قالت هو من عند الله, it is from Allah. إن الله يرزق من يشاء بغير حساب. Allah can give to whosoever He wants without any reckoning. All of this is not, they're reading this to Najashi. Najashi said, stop. And when they looked at him, they said he was weeping. And his beard was wet. Even those bishops who were lobbied against them, they were also crying. The power of the Quran. The power of the Quran. So Najashi said, Wallahi, I will not hand them to you. Go and live freely. So they did. But those Qurayshis who were conspiring, they weren't satisfied with that. They are, because they are cruel. And people who are cruel, they would leave no trick in the book but to try to commit the worst harm on people. So they said, we need to try another trick on the king. And they said, what's that? They said, they went to the king and they said to him, you should ask them what they say about Isa alayhi salam. They thought by doing so, when they're going to say to this king that we don't believe that Isa is the son of Allah and that Isa is not divine, this would be the end of these people, because this is going against completely and directly and unequivocally against a fundamental tenet of Christian belief. So they said, now we can get them. قالت أم سلمة فلما خرج عمرو بن العاص وعبد الله بن أبي ربيعة من عند النجاشي قال عمرو بن العاص والله لآتينه غدا عنهم. Then this is how they conspired. They say, Wallahi, tomorrow we will go to Najashi and we will say to him that they claim that Isa ibn Maryam abd. They claim that Isa is only a abd, a slave of Allah. قال ثم غدا عليه من الغد فقال له أيها الملك إنهم يقولون في عيسى ابن مريم قولا عظيما. They went to the king and they said, they say something very enormous against Isa alayhi salam, and you should hear it from them. Why don't you invite them and ask them? So he did that. The Sahaba, when they got this request, they said to Ja'far, what are we going to do? He says, nothing but speak the truth. We will speak the truth regardless of the consequences. This is tawakkul on Allah. This is complete reliance on Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. فقال له جعفر ابن أبي طالب نقول فيه الذي جاء به نبينا. When he stood there in front of the king, Ja'far said, we say about Isa what our prophet taught us. هو عبد الله ورسوله وروحه. He is the slave of Allah and he is his messenger. And he is the word of Allah which was bestowed on Maryam alayhi salam, who was Virgin Maryam, al-Adra, al-Batul. And we say no more or no less about him. And he is like the previous prophets and the messengers. And his similitude is like that of Adam. Allah Ta'ala created him from dust and he said, be, and he was. At that point, Najashi struck the ground with his staff. ثم قال ما عدا عيسى بن مريم ما قلت. There is between us and you about Isa alayhi salam. The difference between us and you about Isa alayhi salam is this line, a very thin line. And he says, this does not make me think any less of you, but in fact I have more respect for you because of your stance, not compromising your principles, and because of your faith in your own Allah and your trust in your Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Wallahi, he said, I will not hand you to these Qurayshis even if I have to give my life up. You stay in Habasha and live freely. This issue of not compromising one's principles is so powerful, regardless of the circumstances and the consequences. And recall that if you remember, there is a common theme that we are seeing in the Seera. There are certain things where there can be some compromises, as long as those are matters that are not directly related to the tenets or thawabit al-deen, the tenets of deen, such as iman in Allah, or iman in Isa alayhi salam as a Rasul and a messenger and not the son of Allah, etc. And there are certain things that you cannot compromise whatsoever, regardless. You cannot. And subhanallah, in a place like Australia, you probably have witnessed that yourself. I certainly have witnessed it. The more you stand up for who you are, the more you stand up for your principles and values and don't compromise them, the more respect Allah Ta'ala will place in the hearts of people towards you. There is no doubt in my heart about that. Absolutely. Remember the story of the masjid that was burned down in Brisbane? I told you about this story. And I said straight after that, 3 weeks after that, I was invited to many places. One of those places, a very tough town in Queensland called Gympie. Gympie is known as redneck town. You know, it's a Pauline Hanson territory. And so 3 weeks after 9/11, can you imagine? The situation was so tense after 9/11. It was so tense in Australia because immediately the blame was on Muslims. Immediately, the next day, it was Osama's fault, and the Muslims, therefore, by extension, were at fault. It was such a difficult few days, and 20 years later, the same. Very difficult 20 years. And after a radio interview that I gave on national radio, which was live, probably my first radio interview talking about Islam and Muslims. And I said, education, Australia needs to be educated about Islam. And that evening I received a phone call from a person from Gympie, that town which you cannot go to. And the guy's name was Michael. He was from the Apex Club. You know, they have the Lions Club and they have the Apex Club. So he said, we heard your interview, would like to invite you to Gympie to stay with us 3 days. Damar, dead. Khalas. And at the time I was still, younger than what I am now. I'm still 25 now, but I was much younger then. And I was, when you're young, you're full of excitement and heat. You're right, and I didn't go anywhere without my turban and at the time. And so they said, come and stay with us 3 days and you can speak in every school and every church about Islam. Here's your opportunity. SubhanAllah, this was the blessing in disguise after 9/11. Now my mother-in-law, who knew Gympie because she lived close to Gympie, she said, please don't go to Gympie. Please don't go. And if you decide to go, just put some jeans on and some shirt, but don't go like this with your thawb and your umama. Anyway, we decided to go. And one of the first, they asked me to speak in a cathedral. This is a private school. They put 1,000 students in front. And I've never ever spoke in a church or a cathedral before. I never spoke to non-Muslims before. We always gave talks, bayans in the masjid like this, or khutbahs. But that's a failure of Muslims. We have been in this country since 1650s. The Makassars from Indonesia came 200 years before white settlement. And then in the 1850s, the Afghan Cameliers came. They built the first masjid in Australia is here in South Australia, in Maree, right? What were we doing all this time? What were we doing? We had to wait for a tragedy to wake up. Is it because we didn't understand our purpose? Did we all come just for economic prosperity and to have a better life? What about the maqsad of deen? What about what they did with Najashi? The purpose of hijrah for them was to preserve deen. That's what was the purpose of that hijrah. And the ulama say, to preserve one's deen and faith, you must make the ultimate sacrifices. Even if it be leaving your most beloved country and going somewhere else, that you can preserve your faith and identity, your religious identity. That's what they did. Anyway, I stood there and I said whatever I said. I'm talking about the point of principles and not compromising and the respect that you get. Anyway, when I finished, and of course it was so silent, everybody was so quiet. And later on, one of the teachers came to me. She said to me, if you came to us dressed in any other way, we would not have believed you. Ajib. You came as you are. And that made us trust what you said to us. Now that doesn't mean you have to be dressed like this to be trusted. No, that's not the point. The point is, when you stand up for your principles and don't compromise them, Allah Ta'ala will install that respect in the hearts of people. You will see it. And those who don't like it, they often don't come and say anything. SubhanAllah, this Gympie, which was meant to be one of the worst places to go to because of their negativity and racism, and they don't like migrants and they don't like Muslims and so forth, the next day in their newspaper, the Gympie Times, it's called the Gympie Times, the front page, my picture with those students from the school, and the big caption, "City embraces peace message." And there was flash news in that city throughout the day. Muslim leader touches the hearts of Gympie people. From Allah Ta'ala. This is not me, this is Allah Ta'ala. When we stand up for our purpose without compromising it, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala will help us. There is no doubt about it. Yes, there will be challenges along the way. Of course there has to be challenges. We are not better than Ja'far radiallahu anhu bin Abi Talib and those Sahaba. And there will always be people who will try to spread false rumor and false news. And there will be always people who try to lobby against. But that must not detract us and make us stop from trying to achieve our maqsad, our purpose, and that is da'wah ila Allah. That's why you are here, and that's why I am here. Rizq Allah can give anywhere. But we are here for a purpose. We are here for a purpose. And the greatest purpose is what? To please Allah Ta'ala and to become a means to attract people's hearts. One of the dua, the ad'iyah in Arabic say, Ya Allah, make us keys to unlock the hearts, and don't make us locks on the hearts. And in order for us to be able to invite to this deen beautifully, we need to understand it, and we need to be convinced about it, and we need to be able to present it in the most eloquent and beautiful of ways. And if you cannot, then it's quite simple. بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً Rasulullah said, propagate on my behalf even one ayah. If you know one verse, one thing about Islam, make sure you talk about it. Now because of, and I'll finish inshallah ta'ala, because time. Now, inshallah. Because of the ikhlas of Najashi, because he was sincere. And subhanallah, you see this in people until today. People who are truly sincere, and they have a love for justice, and they are searching for the truth, Allah Ta'ala would guide them. And in the case of Najashi, we know that he became a Muslim. We know that because Rasulullah told us. He did so, of course, quietly. He believed in the nubuwwah of Rasulullah, and he concealed his faith from his people because he knew that they were so stubborn on batil. And this is also perhaps another lesson for those who convert in Australia. Sometimes some of our brothers and sisters who convert, they come from very difficult families. Some have it good, and their families are supportive. And some make it very difficult for them. And so it might be wise sometimes that they conceal their Islam for a while until the time is right. And there's nothing wrong with that. And this is the king, the Najashi. I mean, he's the king of the place, and he hid his faith. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu says, أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم نعى النجاشي في اليوم الذي مات فيه وخرج بهم إلى المصلى فصف بهم وكبر عليه 4 تكبيرات. وعن جابر رضي الله عنه قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم حين مات النجاشي مات اليوم رجل صالح فقوموا فصلوا على أخيكم أصحى. When Abu Hurairah said, Rasulullah, when the news came that Najashi had died, Rasulullah felt sad that he had died, and he spoke highly of him. And then he said to the Sahaba, stand up and let's do Salat al-Janazah, Salat al-Ghaib, on your brother who had just passed away. And they did the Salah on him. In another narration by Jabir, قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, when Najashi passed away, Rasulullah said this. Listen to the words. مات اليوم رجل صالح. He says, today a righteous man died. Allahu Akbar. This is the shahada of Rasulullah. This is the testimony of Rasulullah about Najashi. مات اليوم رجل صالح. Today a good man died. Today a good man died, a righteous man died. فَقُومُوا فَصَلُّوا عَلَىٰ أَخِيكُمْ. Stand up and do salah on your brother. And that's why we say about Najashi, radiyallahu anhu. May Allah Ta'ala be pleased with him. And the Najashi died in the 9th year, according to most people, most scholars, or some say the 8th year before Fath. 9th or the 8th year before Fath of Mecca. So, of course, there are so many lessons from this. It's fascinating, actually, a very fascinating story about Najashi. One thing is the relevance of the revelation of Surah Maryam before they were asked to make hijrah indicates to us that it's important to understand the belief of the people to whom you are migrating and know your own beliefs about those matters. So in the case of Isa alayhi salam and Maryam, Allah Ta'ala taught them what they should believe about Isa and Maryam, so that when they do confront, in this case, the Christians, and they have a dialogue about these issues, they do dialogue based on knowledge and not based on wishful thinking. But also the dialogue should be done beautifully. It should be done with humility. It should not be, sometimes people dialogue in such stubborn and arrogant ways that, dispels people, makes them feel more hate towards Islam and Muslims. Just remember one thing, we can't change people's hearts. We cannot do that. So if you scream at people and shout at them, you're not going to change people's hearts. Allah Ta'ala changes people's hearts. All we have been asked to do is do so beautifully. ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن. Invite to the way of your Lord with wisdom. With wisdom. And if you were to dialogue with them, do so in the most beautiful of ways. And if they don't accept, that's fine. You're not there to convince anybody. You just present the message. And Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala is the one who allows people to receive or not to receive the message. But a message that comes from the heart has more chances of penetrating the other heart than a message that simply comes from the mouth. That which comes from the heart goes to the heart. No doubt about it. الإنسان كالوعاء. A human being is like a container. It receives. And they say the da'wah is like the dua. The strength of the da'wah and the dua is according to this. It's like, they say, it's the da'wah and dua is like shooting an arrow. The strength and the accuracy of shooting an arrow depends on the excellence of the archer himself or herself. And the same thing, if the person is convinced about the message and they're not just arguing for the sake of arguing. Sometimes it's best not to argue. Sometimes it's best to just live by example and let people observe your beautiful character and conduct and deen. And that might have an impact on them. That could have an impact on them. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. May Allah Azza wa Jal give me and you the tawfiq to follow the beautiful sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. May Allah Tabarak Ta'ala also give us the tawfiq to learn from his Seera alayhi salatu wassalam. And may Allah Tabarak Ta'ala give us the tawfiq to be means of goodness in this country. And may Allah Ta'ala use us to be the means of hidayah, inshaAllah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, in this country. And not to believe that we are here for sustenance. Allah gives sustenance, rizq wherever He wants, but rather we are here for a more sublime and bigger purpose. And this purpose is, how can we become the means to people's hearts so they may know Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. That is the greatest gift that we can give. That is the greatest gift. But to do so, we need to practice this beautiful deen. We need to learn about it. And we need to ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to utilize us and not to replace us. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وجزاكم الله خيرا.